Hey everyone, Chris and Jason here with the Private Lenders Podcast. One real quick note, just want to say that if you've checked out some of our recent podcasts and videos in the Mastermind group, sorry that my audio has been off. I know a couple people have mentioned it. It's fixed now, hopefully, as you can tell, and got better equipment, and we're back on track. So if you haven't checked out the Mastermind yet, you can create a free account and join the conversation at hardmoneymastermind.com. Today, we're talking about some industry considerations for 2021. Now, a couple things we're going to mention. It comes from what we're thinking about, talking about inside our lending company, some of the chatter going on inside the Mastermind group, some of the topics that we've seen that are going to be addressed at upcoming industry conferences. And we just want to talk it through, talk about some of the changes going on, the things to look out for the rest of 2021.
Yeah, I mean, you may be currently a broker, you may currently have a full service hard money lending company, you may be a private lender, new experience, but no matter kind of what part of the private lending sector that you're in, established or just kind of getting started, I think it's important to definitely keep an eye of kind of what's going on, because things have been changing a lot over the last few years. I mean, since we started in 2007, things have drastically changed. Some good, some bad, but we're able to adapt to them along the way. And it's important to make sure you're kind of on top of what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. So let's dive in. I've made a couple notes here I'm looking down at. First, let's talk about commercial real estate and lending on commercial. So obviously commercial and residential have been in a very different place over the past year, over the past pandemic year. Commercial means a bunch of different things. So it is performing, given the pandemic, very differently. So multifamily has obviously done well, same as single family, we know that. And retail has been having a very hard time for obvious reasons. Same with office, with so many people working from home and companies even realizing that they don't need so much space anymore. You have industrial, with the shipping and everything else being delivered to people's houses. Industrial type of spaces, warehouse, stuff like that. Manufacturing, I think, has done pretty well. Hospitality, so you have hotels, restaurants, stuff like that. Not in a great spot. I mean, I've been in hotels in the past year that had like 2 employees and 3 guests staying there, and it's a big place. And it's kind of scary, like when you walk around. They even had, when I was in one in Westchester, New York, where they had probably 70% of the lights in the building turned off because they don't want to pay for the electricity. There's nobody there. It's like a couple employees in this big Marriott. And so, okay, anyway, a little tangent there. But point being, if you're doing bridge loans on commercial properties, your underwriting is going to vary greatly depending on what asset type it is.
Yeah, no, I think that's kind of where we get where this all comes around, because obviously most hard money lenders do the standard fix and flip loans and maybe some loans on rental properties or investment residential, but there's nothing wrong with dabbling with some commercial stuff if you can wrap your brain around the project. I remember right when COVID hit, we had one of our capital investors who's a friend of ours, and we talked to him, and he was like, yeah, I'm cool with the fix and flip stuff. I think the residential stuff's good, but the commercial stuff, I don't know. Like, I'm uncertain of what it's doing. And I was like, listen, just because it's, there's a lot of volatility and you're not certain where it goes, doesn't mean you need to pull out completely. There's a number that still works, right? Like, let's say you have a retail strip, single purpose retail strip, and in an area that, let's say it's normally worth $500,000 based off income and sales approach. And normally you would lend 325, right? Like 65% based on the current value of the property. That doesn't necessarily mean that you still lend 325. Go back, figure out a number that makes sense. I told him, I was like, if you had a borrower that owns this property free and clear, and they need a $100,000 bridge loan on it to do whatever with, something, investment, business purpose, commercial purpose use for it, would you do it? He was like, absolutely, of course I would. It's no brainer. I was like, exactly. So throttle down. You don't have to lend that 65%. The important part is kind of just understanding, since COVID's hit, we've lent on self-storage. We've lent, and forget fixing, this is besides our normal fix and flip stuff. We lent on self-storage. We've lent on retail. We've lent on office.
Multifamily,
industrial. We've lent on almost every one of those asset classes based on the numbers that we're comfortable with, right? As of today, where we're comfortable with. And you look at the whole thing. So I don't want to go on a rant of why you don't have to lend up to 65%, even though that's kind of the target to be in. But just don't throw it away just because you're uncertain about the asset class. There's a number that works. But I will tell you, if you've only done fix and flip and you have not done commercial stuff, again, learn it a little bit before you kind of dive into that.
Definitely.
But it's definitely something that you can consider.
Yeah, you should definitely consider as is based, bridge loans on commercial properties. It's a great niche. We do much more of it if we got it. It's just hard to come by. Okay, moving on. So managing loan defaults is a bit different in the past pandemic year than normal. And so let's talk about residential. There are a lot of foreclosure moratoriums out there where you can't get to an auction sale. They're not scheduling them. In some jurisdictions, they'll let you start, but they won't let you do a sale. In other ones, it's vice versa, right? You can't start new ones, but they will let you get to a sale if you're already in process. So anyway, it's all over the place. And so there's definitely it'll be interesting to see how this plays out for the resi market in general, but there's going to be a glut, like a backlog of foreclosures coming up, just like there was back in the Great Recession. But that's only because they couldn't get to them because there's so many. Now there's no foreclosures because there's a foreclosure moratorium in so many jurisdictions, right? So there's going to be more foreclosures hitting the market probably late this year. But at the same time, as we know, the residential market has been performing so well that even though we can't foreclose on some properties that are in default, on some loans that are in default, they're selling on their own. Some of our, I don't have too many headaches, but definitely a handful, 5, 6 headaches that have been dragging on for a while, and the client went in default, hasn't been able to exit, are exiting now, are exiting in the first and second quarter of 2021 because the market's so good. So there's pros and cons, and it makes for some, the need for some creative management of the defaults, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to say it. I mean, you always want to be playing offense with defaults. You don't want defaults to just work themselves out. And if a borrower is in real default, I don't mean like they missed a payment or something. If they're in real default, they haven't been making payments for months, they've abandoned their construction job, they've ghosted you and you can't get a hold of them. Like, you have to be aggressive, right? And being aggressive and playing offense sometimes costs money, right? Because you got to retain an attorney. You have to follow your judgment potentially. You have to follow your foreclosure if you can. In some areas you can't file foreclosure right now. But speak to whoever your counsel is who does that in that jurisdiction and figure out what the best way to do it. There's deals that we can't file foreclosure on now, but we can file judgments on, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the action that we go. And sometimes vice versa, but you got to play offense on these things. You don't want to just wait until you're able to foreclose again, because who knows, that could take longer. And there is also a new bill that's coming out, not coming out, I shouldn't say that. There's a new bill that's proposed that is going to really do whatever you can. So you can kind of go through, mediation or something. So they try not to be able to foreclose on some of these things. And then if, they're trying to keep the owners in these properties. Now, keep in mind, we're not lending to consumers. We're lending to sophisticated real estate investors and commercial property owners, right? So that's a little bit different. And most of your borrowers don't have a real emotional tie to the property. They just want to make money on this thing, right? So figure out a way to be creative with them. Figure out a way of saying, hey, listen, I'll make you a deal. If you get this thing under contract, I'll give you a discount on, some of your back default interest or late fees or something like that. But the goal is just play offense with your defaults. I know the market's really good, and a lot of the times they're going to work themselves out right now, but you always got to be playing offense to make sure you can get these things worked out. And take your ego aside with defaults as well. If you can get the majority of your interest back, all principal plus the majority of your interest, and maybe waive late fees or cut it a little bit, just to get your money back and then move on and redeploy it into the next best deal.
Yeah, totally true. If you can get a decent payoff, take it and get out, because time is not on your side in those situations. Okay, cool. Moving on to the next topic. Let's talk about brokers a little bit. So now, if you've been paying attention to our mastermind group or our podcast for any length of time, you know that we prefer lending, controlling the entire transaction and the company, the capital, the portfolio, the lead flow. We like controlling the thing end to end. Not everyone is set up for that. Maybe not everyone has that skill set or that desire to run every aspect of the lending business, so they prefer to broker. If you are brokering either part-time or full-time, you're in an interesting spot because there's a lot of fluctuations going on with capital sources and lending companies. And we're going to talk more about capital in a second. But I think that there is opportunity for brokers, good opportunity, if you have some solid capital sources and some plan Bs. Obviously, within the brokers world, like deal flow and marketing and sales is 80% of the job, maybe, like 60, 70% of the job. And then the rest, the capital side. But if you have good deals, it would make sense to maybe have more options in terms of capital, or like a plan A, plan B situation. Like that happens with us a lot. A broker will say, yeah, I tried to get him through here with the cheap money, didn't work out. We got to close. Can you do it? Like, and that makes for closed deals. That makes for people getting their fees paid. So yeah, I think if you're on your toes and you know what you're doing, there is still a good amount of opportunity for brokers in 2021.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to kind of have your hands tied like you were, or your hands behind your back like you were in early March 2020 when COVID hit, because all the funding sources went out of business. And if you didn't have private capital, you couldn't do any deals. Like you didn't close any loans. You weren't able to, right? I'm all about, brokering or setting up some sort of facility with some of these bank lenders, but we know they're not always going to be around. And we also know that they change and you don't have any control. So again, do I think it's a good business model currently? Yeah, sure. But long term, I'm not sure. You already have the most important part, which is a good real estate deal, right? You already have a borrower. That's the important part, right? These lending companies are begging you to broker the loans to you. Us as a hard money lender, we do whatever we can for our brokers to make sure they can send us deals. So you just don't want to get put into a trap that you don't have several options, right? So might as well try to go raise some private capital as well, so you have multiple options.
In our opinion, that's always the solution, is controlling capital and doing smart things with it, maybe in addition to your brokering business. So yeah, let's roll right into that topic of capital, because industry chatter, here's what I'm hearing, both like throughout the past year and then also recently, is that things were more stable capital-wise a couple years ago pre-pandemic. And as we know, and as Jason just mentioned, a lot of those funding sources totally paused for 6 weeks, maybe 2 months when the pandemic began. And then some of them came back and some of them didn't. And then some of them came back with different guidelines. And then a couple of months later, changed their guidelines. And what I'm hearing from people who do use these institutional sources of capital is that it's constantly a moving target of who's funding what the guidelines are, what the pricing is, and what the future holds. So as you know, if you've been listening to us, like we've never relied on these sources of capital. We don't use them at all. It's just not what we want our business to be. I don't really blame people who do, but I think they should be prepared for change in that world. And you know what? And I was just thinking, we've been saying for a while that a softening residential market, which is very possible in the near future, could move some of those people out of our space. But you know what else is going on? Is rising interest rates. Rising short-term rates and increased cost of capital for the institutional people could make them back out of the hard money world just because they're not making the money they want. Or in order to do so, they have to go to, back to double-digit interest rates and everything else. And then if that's the case, what's the advantage for borrowers to use bank-like money when they could use private people? So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I think, like in any other situation, the moral of the story is to have options, control some money. If you're using institutional bank-like money, cool, but have a plan B, because that plan B could become your plan A overnight. When those people decide to hop, they hop in 2 days and then they're all gone. And then one follows the other and that money's gone. So we've seen it happen before.
Yeah. And keep in mind that a lot of lenders decided to use hard money lending companies as they grow. They decided to use the institutional backed capital for two reasons. Number one, ease of capital. They're able to scale and raise a lot of capital very, very easily from one party. And number two, they felt that it was the only way for them to deploy money because it could be significantly cheaper. Not our model, but I do understand why someone would do that, right? But again, one thing we have been seeing, like Chris said, that it's a moving target. The rates seem to have been going up a little bit. We've been 13 and 3 forever, right? 13% interest rate and 3 points, 1 year term forever. And there's a big difference between 13 and 3 and 7 and 1, right? there is. It's like, hey, HMB can move really, really quick. But if I go over here and it's a little bit more of a headache, maybe I got to show tax returns or other financials, but I can get cheaper capital and I can push the seller off for a month or whatever. It's worth doing. I understand that. But it seems that a lot of these loan programs, and we're talking fix and flip loans right now, not rental loans. Rental loans are ridiculously cheap right now, but fix and flip loans, like the core deals that most hard money lenders do, the rates are a lot closer than they were. Right. I know someone who has institutional backed capital that they charge 9.99 and 3 points. The difference between 9.99 and 3 points and 13% and 3 points is very, very little over a few months period.
6 month deal, for example.
3, 4, 5 months before they fix it. It's very, very little for headaches or ease. So make sure you're selling, you know what's going on. Part of the understanding what's going on in the industry is so you can sell against it or sell with it or however you're selling when you're originating loans. But there's still some lending companies, like I'll tell you, because we're on the front lines. Like we originate loans every day. That's what we do. We have a full-time hard money business that we take very seriously, that we spend a lot of time in together. So what I've heard is, a lot of the times recently, is number one, the costs are very, very similar now, or closer than they were. And number two, it's like, you know what? I can't go to this company anymore. They change enough terms on me. It's a pain in the neck. It doesn't work. I just need to get this thing easily done. So like, I like hearing that, right? We want that to happen. I mean, personally, we want the institutional capital to not necessarily dry up, because I think it's good to have that in place, but to be more aligned with what's going on. And I think that now's the time, if you haven't raised private capital, to really spend time, and because it's a long play, it's not going to happen overnight, and do it. There's a lot of sophisticated people out there that have capital to deploy, either through cash or their self-directed IRA, and they understand this business model now. Years ago, they didn't understand the business model. Now it's everywhere, right? If you go roll over an IRA to a self-directed IRA, it's like, oh, promissory notes, like the first thing on the checkbox of like what in your direction of investment form of how you're going to put the money out. So I think it's easier to raise capital now than it was in the past, because so many people are aware of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that in those exact terms, but yeah, I mean, the things going on in the industry, the stuff to be, I think it's a good opportunity happening. And we're talking a lot about that in the mastermind group. So if you're prepared, there's going to be some things that shake up and you can capitalize on it. Start when things are kind of messy, because that probably will happen in the near future. That's how we started back in 2007. Things were really messy. We came in with good timing and a good operation and built up a good business. So that's what we're discussing in the mastermind. We'd love to have you check that out as well. You can create a free account anytime at hardmoneymastermind.com. And yeah, anything else at the end there to wrap up?
Yeah, there's many ways to listen or watch this podcast between Private Lenders Podcast. We post all of this stuff on hardmoneymastermind.com. And if you're listening to this on iTunes or any type of podcast platform, we'd really, really appreciate it if you could share it or give us a 5-star review. We're looking to spread this knowledge. There's not a lot of this knowledge out there, especially for private lending and hard money lending. There was zero of this knowledge when we started, but there's still very, very little knowledge about this, and there's not all that many people that talk about it. So if you'd enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate a review, and we'll check